All right, welcome. Today, we're going to jump right in and tackle a massive idea in economics, one that promises wealth and prosperity for everyone. But as we're about to see, when you look a little closer, the story isn't quite that simple. Let's get into it. You've heard this your whole life, right? Free trade is the golden ticket. It's supposed to lift all boats, making every country richer and more peaceful. It's a fantastic, optimistic idea. But the source material we're digging into today asks a really tough question. What if that powerful engine of prosperity has a hidden catch? What if it actually sinks some of those boats? Okay, so before we get to the big twist, we've got to understand the original promise. For centuries, economists have been making this really compelling case for why opening up borders for goods and services is a slam dunk, a win-win for literally everyone involved.
At the absolute core of this promise is a concept called comparative advantage. Now, the idea itself is actually pretty simple, but it is incredibly powerful. It basically says, instead of every country trying to do everything, each one should just focus on what it does best, or most efficiently. If a country is great at making cars, it should just make cars. If another is amazing at growing coffee, let them handle the coffee. Then they trade. And in theory, everyone gets more stuff for less money. It's supposed to be a perfect system. And this wasn't just about getting rich. The belief, going way back, was that if our economies are all tangled up with each other, we're a lot less likely to, go to war. More trade was supposed to mean more peace. It's a really beautiful vision, and it's one that has profoundly shaped our modern world.
So, with a promise that big, more money, and more peace, it's really no surprise that for the last several decades, the world has gone all in on making it happen. And the main tool for the job is something called economic integration. Now, economic integration isn't like flipping a switch. It's more like climbing a ladder. It starts simple with a free trade area. Think something like NAFTA, where countries just agree, hey, no taxes on each other's stuff. Then you can move up a rung to a customs union, where you all agree on the same external taxes for the rest of the world. The next step is a common market, which lets not just goods, but people and money move around freely. And at the very top of the ladder, you've got a full-on economic union with a shared currency and common economic rules. The whole shebang. And if you want the textbook example of this ladder in action, just look at the European Union. It started small, back in the 50s, with just a deal on coal and steel. From there, it climbed the ladder, becoming a customs union, then a common market, and eventually the full economic union we know today, with the euro and everything. This is the blueprint. Okay, so we've built this picture of a perfect system with a clear path to prosperity. Well, this is where our story takes a huge turn. Because as countries climb this ladder and get closer and closer, something fundamental about the very nature of trade starts to change. The rules of the game begin to transform. So here it is, the central question. What happens when trade between, say, France and Germany starts to look less like international trade and a lot more like trade between California and Nevada? What happens when sovereign nations start to act just like different regions inside one giant country? I mean, just look at the difference. Old school international trade had all kinds of barriers, tariffs, quotas, different currencies, and it was really hard for a worker to just pack up and move. But in these new, deeply integrated economic unions, those barriers are gone. You might have a single currency. Labor can move much more freely. For all practical purposes, what we used to call international trade effectively becomes interregional trade. To really wrap our heads around the massive consequences of this shift, the source material uses this brilliant thought experiment. It asks us to stop thinking about different countries for a minute and instead look at two regions inside the same country, regions that have had perfect 100% free trade for centuries.
So here's the setup. Imagine Mexico wasn't always one country. Imagine it started as 32 separate nations that all decided to form a perfect economic union. No trade barriers, free movement of people, the whole deal. A free trader's paradise. So fast forward to today. What's the result? Did that perfect system make all 32 of those nations equally rich and successful?
Well, the data is pretty shocking, actually. When you compare a highly developed area like the Distrito Federal, that's basically Mexico City, with a poorer, more rural state like Chiapas, the numbers are just jaw-dropping. The GDP per person is over 3 times higher in the capital. And this isn't just about money. Look at the disparities in everything from piped water to education to the number of doctors and lawyers. The gaps are enormous. And this isn't just numbers on a spreadsheet. This has a real impact on people's lives. Let's just take healthcare. In Mexico City, you have nearly 49 doctors for every 10,000 people. In Chiapas, you have 7.5. That's a staggering difference in your ability to get basic medical attention. It's the exact same story with education. In the capital city, almost 2/3 of the population has education beyond primary school. In Chiapas, it's less than a quarter. So here's the real kicker. Even within this perfect economic union, free trade absolutely did not lift all boats equally. In fact, some boats were left very, very far behind. So that's the big mystery, right? Why does this happen? Why doesn't the wealth just spread out and even things up over time? Well, the answer lies in a powerful economic theory that completely flips the conventional wisdom about markets on its head. This Swedish economist, Gunnar Myrdal, he basically came along and said, hey, everyone, you've got this all wrong. He argued that if you just leave the market to its own devices, it doesn't create balance. No, it does the opposite. The market actually tends to make rich places richer and poor places poorer. It actively increases inequality. His big theory was called circular cumulative causation. It's a fancy name, but the idea is actually really intuitive. It's just a feedback loop. Think of a snowball rolling downhill. Any little push it gets just makes it roll faster and get bigger. A good start leads to more good things. That's a virtuous cycle. But a bad start? That leads to more bad things. A vicious cycle. The key takeaway is that the system doesn't self-correct. It just accelerates in whatever direction it's already going. So let's look at how this works in a rich region. Let's say a new industry pops up. That attracts investment and skilled workers. All those new people with new jobs create more demand for houses, for restaurants, for stores, which in turn fuels even more investment. Incomes rise, savings go up, and bam, the region gets locked in a virtuous cycle where success just keeps breeding more success.
But it's the grim mirror image for a poor region. A major factory shuts down. The most talented, ambitious workers leave to go to that booming city we just talked about. That's the classic brain drain. With fewer people and less money, there's absolutely no incentive for new investment to come in. The region gets trapped in a vicious, self-reinforcing cycle of decline that's incredibly difficult to escape.
And this all brings us to the final and, frankly, pretty sobering conclusion of this analysis. What happens when you combine this powerful rich-get-richer effect with a modern global trend of deep economic integration? Well, you get what the source calls the neoliberal trap. And it's a two-part problem. Part one is the engine. A hands-off, free market approach lets those feedback loops run wild, creating huge, growing gaps between the winners and the losers. But then there's part two, the cage. At the exact same time, deep economic integration forces countries to give up the very policy tools they would normally use to fix the problem. They can't set their own economic policy anymore. So you're basically flooring the accelerator on the engine of inequality while taking your hands completely off the steering wheel. So the ultimate warning from the source material is this. When a developing nation enters into a deep free trade agreement with a much more developed one, it risks getting permanently locked into the role of the poorer region. It risks becoming the Chiapas to the other country's Distrito Federal. And this leaves us with a profound and difficult question for our globalized world. The grand promise of free trade was prosperity for all. But if the very process of integration that makes it possible also creates deep, lasting inequality while simultaneously taking away a nation's power to address it, who or what is left to step in and ensure a fair outcome for everyone?